I've been doing this for a while. It has been about 2 hours since I last coded, so I am a full-time developer and do a lot of that. So I'm sure a lot of people have heard the phrase, "You're not a real developer unless you've blank." One thing that I really want us to get out of everybody's head is what defines a real developer. Some of the common pitfalls people say is developers only write in X language. Developers only have to spend Y amount of time coding, or they're not real developers. Development's a talent that it can't be learned. All of these are false. If you write any code, doesn't matter if it's HTML, if it's JavaScript, if it's Apex, if you're writing assembly language, doesn't matter, you're a developer. If you do any sort of development, you're a developer. Salesforce has a bit of a nomenclature difference than a lot of places, where developers in the Salesforce world are people who do flows, process builders, things of that nature that are clicks, not code. They're still considered developers. I would say that that's fine. If you do that and you want to call yourself developer, do it. You're the only one that defines what a developer is. But if you're not a developer, there are some things that we can do to help you on that path. And the first thing that you can do, even if you decide never to write a line of code in any language, is learn the lingo. And I'm going to kind of equate this to music. If you want to get better at music, you need to learn how to read music. You can so you can understand the tempo, understand the note types, the meters. These are things that learning to read music is very important. They're the common terms that, whether you're learning a guitar, whether you're learning ukulele, marimba, any of those things, they all have the common language. And that's very similar with coding. You'll hear terms like loops and variables and functions. If you understand what these terms mean, they are the same across every language. A function or a method in Python is the same as it is in JavaScript. It's a small piece of code that does something. A loop is the same in Flow as it is in Fortran. It is a way to loop over variables and do things with them. So these common terms, the common vernacular, will help you become a developer. Even if you don't write code, learning these things can help when you're dealing with people like me who are developers. So if you're a business analyst or you're a Scrum Master or something like that, and you hear these common terms, knowing this can help you relate and understand what those crazy basement dweller developers you're dealing with, are talking about. The other thing that you can do is picking the right tool for the job. Picking the right language is essential. Find one that's similar to your target. If you're going back to our music metaphor, if you want to learn the guitar, it's easier to learn another instrument like a mandolin first and then move the guitar than it is to start with an oboe and move to a guitar. They're not the same. They're a completely different class of instruments. So finding a language to start with and moving to one that's similar is going to be an easier way to do that. That's not saying you can't. I started programming in a language called Pascal, and then moved on to other languages. And like real human languages, learning the first one is the hardest. The second one gets slightly easier, and the more languages you learn, especially if they're similar, becomes easier and easier. So let's take a look at some different language families. There are two main classes, and there are going to be exceptions in these for all of them, but just in general, you have an imperative language that is something like Fortran, C, Lisp, PHP, the ones listed here. These are ones that pretty much run from top to bottom. You do you say, I want to run this, and it runs through it as a script, and it's not object oriented. The other languages are object oriented. So if we talk about Java and Apex, they are based around the idea that each class does a thing, and then you call that class by implementing it. So would say, if you know what you want to go with, so for example, if you know, I want to learn to write code for Salesforce, or my company needs me to be able to be an Apex developer because we don't have anybody, learning an object-oriented language first may be a good way to slide into that. So if you have Java courses or Java books, going from Java to Apex is going to be way easier than going from JavaScript to Apex or PHP to Apex. But again, there are lots of ways to learn languages that will also transfer over. So things like Code Academy have some great JavaScript courses, and they're free. And they will teach you that common language again. They'll teach you what a variable is. They'll teach you what a loop is. And so learning these things and then moving to Apex will make that easier than just trying to brute force your way straight into Apex. So we talked about step 1, learn the lingo. What is step 2 before we get to step 3 of profit? Find a project. If you just say, I want to learn something, that's great, but it's never going to stick if you just learn it to learn it. Just like speaking a language or playing an instrument, just learning how to do it and never practicing, never doing it with an actual reason to do it, you will quickly lose that skill. And development is a skill that the more you use, the easier it gets and the better you can become at it. So find a project, start simple. Do something that is personal to you, something that you need to do. Find something in your everyday life that is a problem that you can solve with programming. I give an example of I had a freezer at my house that within a year, I lost power to and lost every bit of food in my freezer twice. And at that point, I kind of got upset and decided I'm going to figure out how to solve this. And because I'm a programmer, that's how I went about it. So I learned how to do hardware development, very simple hardware that took the temperature of my freezer. And then I learned a programming language called Squirrel to write that. And then I pushed that data into Salesforce because I figured, why not? I can learn a little bit more about Salesforce development, and monitored my freezer for about 1.5 years from Salesforce. I created a case every time my freezer got too hot, and I assigned it to me, and I had email rules that would email me if it didn't get resolved fast enough, and auto-resolving rules that if the temperature dropped back down, it would close the case for me so I wouldn't get spammed every time I opened the freezer door. But that was something that was personal to me. It was a reason to do some development. And that may seem like that's a lot to do, but if you look at it as breaking it down into small steps, it's not a whole lot. I do the little bit of hardware. Then I figure out how to take the temperature. And then I figure out how to send that temperature to somewhere. So small steps. And one of the best pieces of advice I can give anybody is don't be afraid to solve it and then come back and solve it better. There's a great quote from Winston Churchill: perfection is the enemy of progress. I cannot tell you how many times in my personal life, my professional life, and in my volunteering life that I have done some ugly code that I would not show my computer science professors ever in my entire life. But you know what? They work. They get things done. They unblocked us. They made something easier. And then you can always go back and learn from your mistakes and make it better, make it more efficient, make it cleaner, make it prettier. But getting in there, getting it done, and learning from it is one of the best things you can do. So let's say you don't have a freezer you want to automate, or that seems like way too much work. We can come up with some other ideas. One of my favorite things to tell people that want to be a developer to do is make your own personal website. All of us in this year and this day and time need a way to say, this is me, this is what I'm good at, and to market yourself. And one of the best ways that you can do that, and one of the honestly cheapest ways you can do it, is with a very simple personal website. You can spend about $11 a year for a domain name, and you can host it on GitHub for free, and you can learn HTML at the very least, and use GitHub to learn Git. Those are two very key things that a lot of developers need to learn. You want to make it even more fancy, learn JavaScript and learn how to do that. You can take things like Markdown and convert it into HTML with JavaScript. There are lots of things that you can expand upon in a personal website that is more than just, your picture and your, list of achievements. But it's a great way to start small, get that picture of you, get your name up on a page, and instant gratification. It's there, it's available, it's on the web. And then figure out what next. Maybe you want to add an interactive resume. That's where you can then learn to code and learn to add more to your tool belt of things that being an employee at Red Hat for about 16 years now, open source contributions are a great way. There is a time of year every year in October. There's a community-wide project called Hacktoberfest, where all sorts of open source platforms and tools make issues that are available for people who want to learn to code. So you can go and find things that are flagged as good for first timers. And this doesn't have to be actual hardcore development. You don't have to go into the VS Code code base and fix a bug there. There are lots of small projects that have one, maybe two developers that would love some help. There are ways that you can contribute by writing documentation. A great way to learn a new language is to take a chunk of code and read it and try to figure out how it works and why it works. And writing documentation and documenting those things is a great way to learn more about it. And I can tell you, as a developer of several open source projects, I hate writing documentation. I would love for somebody to come in and write it for me. I don't care if I have to spend 6 hours with them explaining how every bit of code works. If I don't have to write the documentation, that's a win for me. So that's a way that you can, give back to the open source community, as well as learn more about development. Find something in your life that you do every day on your computer and figure out how to make that, codable. If every day you come sit down at your computer, you launch Reddit, you launch Zoom, you look at your calendar, you do those things, that could be a script. If you're running Linux, a shell script. If you're running Windows, a PowerShell script. That is a good way to get started on something small. One other way is home automation. I would sit here and talk for hours to anybody that would listen about home automation. It's one of my favorite things to do. And there are lots of both open source tools like Home Assistant that is out there that you can either give back to or just use and learn to develop based on that. So, home automation is great because, we all have things in our life that we could make a little easier with a very little bit amount of automation in your life or your home. So why not make it fun and learn while you're doing it? And then there's always community work. If your actual job doesn't say, yeah, we need a developer, I can almost guarantee you there's a nonprofit near you that would be chomping at the bit for somebody to help them to be a developer. And most of those would be fine with you taking the time and learning on the job because they don't have anybody, and being able to give that time away, they will gladly wait for you to learn and figure out and go ahead and do it. And it's pretty low risk because you can do it on your own time. You don't have to worry about, feeling that your boss is going to breathe down your neck because you spent a week debugging a problem, and that you're a failure as a developer. So this is, community work's a great way to do that as well. And one of the last steps to be a developer is find a mentor. I'm sure you've heard the adage, practice makes perfect, but that's not true. Practice makes permanent, not perfect. If you learn to develop on your own and you start making bad mistakes, those mistakes will become permanent the more you do them. For example, especially in the Salesforce world, because we're running multi-tenant, if you get in the habit of writing triggers that do DML operations, inserts, updates, queries inside of a loop, that is a hard thing to unlearn. And that is where a mentor comes into play. Salesforce community has a mentorship program. I'm sure that there are people in your local user group that would love to help you out as a mentor. Even most companies will have, if they're large enough, will have a mentorship. And you don't necessarily need to find a mentor that knows exactly the language that you're working. So let's say you're working for, a medium to large size company that you don't have any Salesforce developers, but you've got some Java developers or a JavaScript developer that's working on your website. Talk to them, learn again those fundamentals, and then they can help you to think about it in a different way to break down these projects. So if you've got a thing that you need to do at work, but you don't know where to start, a developer that may not know the language, but understands how development, the process works, might be able to help you look at your problem and break it down into smaller chunks and help you get started. So that's what I've got for you. The rest of this time is going to be, if you have questions, I want to hear it. I want to know problems that you've had in the past and ways that I can help you understand how to overcome them. I'd love to hear stories of anybody that has tried these things, and if they've worked, that'd be great. I want to be able to have time to discuss this.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming. We have a channel in the Hawaii Slack group. If you saw my message in Hawaii Slack and that's how you found out about us, there's a Salesforce user group channel in there. You can add yourself to it and chat with us throughout the month. And we will see you again at the beginning of April. Thanks for coming out tonight.